Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
All right, we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Canadian Story. Today, we are joined by someone I'm excited to speak with. Her name's Tanya Clemens, and she is a farmer in Alberta. Tanya, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's our absolute pleasure to have you here. So I spilled the beans. You're a farmer, but why don't you just elaborate on that? What's your history? What's your background? Who are you? Where are you from? What's your story?
Okay, well, like a great deal of farmers in our area anyways, I'm a multi-generational farmer. Our family farm was homesteaded in 1909 by my great-grandfather. I've watched my dad work his tail off his entire life to improve the farm, expand the farm, do more with less, and always just seeking to do a better job of growing food for the world population. So I grew up in that atmosphere. My parents were very insistent on us having degrees in university as a backup plan. We couldn't just come back to the farm immediately. So I did go to university and ended up getting a degree in biology and education and taught for a few years, raised my kids for quite a long time. I was blessed to do that, and then ultimately returned to the farm.
Okay, amazing. So how many generations has the farm been in your family?
Well, I would be the fourth generation, and my kids would be the fifth generation.
Wow. That's incredible to me. That is what a cool thing to pass land, like a piece, like quite literally a piece of Canada down through the generations of Canadians that occupy that space. That's such an incredible heritage. What does that make you feel?
Like immense pride. I think that we have like an unexplainable connection to the land, like just the actual dirt and the land that we farm. It's hard to actually put into words how connected we are to it. But I do love hearing the stories of like the homesteading, of what everyone had to go through, the generations way before us, and how difficult it was to get started. And then each generation after that has just tried to build and improve the technology you're trying to keep up with. Like, yeah, it's just kind of neat to see each generation, what they can add to it and how it's increased.
Yeah. What exactly is homesteading? I hear that term a lot, but I don't actually understand it.
Like when that was first, it wasn't broken into fields. There wasn't really tons of agriculture when Europeans first settled over here, when they would be given a quarter section of land and a couple tools. And there was rules about when they had to plow their fields by, and they had to create like a living establishment. So some kind of a sod house or something they could live in and start their farm. So It was just the very basics of beginning and breaking the land and growing things.
Okay, great. So the original settling of the land.
Yeah.
How many, if you don't mind me asking, how many acres do you guys have?
We farm a pretty good amount. It's probably close to 9,000 acres.
Wow, that's massive. That's so big.
There's farms that are way bigger. There's farms that are way smaller. Like it's a huge variety. It just depends on everybody's stories and goals. So
yeah, how many people do you have working those acres? Like what is the staffing need to farm 9,000 acres?
There's 3 full-time workers, and then I work like part-time. Like I'm seasonal. I'll drive the combine, which is kind of the primo job. It's lots of times what like the farm wives get is the combine driving, which I am happy to have that job for as long as I can keep it. And then I help in the office some. And my mom does all the books for the farm, which is a gigantic job.
Right. So what does the combine do for those who don't know? I know the answer, but for those who don't.
The combine?
Yeah.
It's harvest time. It's like the threshing machine. So after the crop is grown, it's the big, huge machines that you see going through the crop that actually cuts it down, or it might be cut down already by swather, but takes in the crop, threshes it, separates the parts that you want from the parts that you don't want, keeps all of like the seeds, like the wheat, the barley, the canola, and then chops up the rest and puts it out back into the soil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And why return that chaff to the soil?
Because it adds a lot of biomass to the soil. It's really good for it. It adds nutrients back that weren't used by the plant. The same as like gardening, right? You always add like your compost and things to the soil. It's good to add organic matter back to the soil to help with growth.
Mm-hmm. So the same sort of concept. So do you exclusively farm crop, or do you have an animal portion to your farm as well?
now we exclusively farm crop, just grain farming. But we did used to have cattle. My dad actually started out, he had turkeys and he had pigs, and eventually got rid of those and was just cattle. And probably, I can't remember if it was before or after BSE, actually, now to think about it. But we got rid of our cattle herd. It just became a lot with like the size of the grain farm, and the cattle always seemed to be getting out when we were trying to harvest and interrupting harvest. And I don't know, it had served its purpose, I guess, and was time to switch.
So the transition was mostly just out of a desire to simplify the process.
Yeah, I think, and just focus on the grain farming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes sense when you have 9,000 acres to farm grain on. What crops do you primarily farm? I know that you're always alternating, but what are your like staples?
Well, really, we only farm wheat, barley, canola, and peas. And so every year we have a portion of our farm that is seeded to all four of those, but each portion of that farm will rotate. So it's like a 4-year crop rotation between them. And we didn't always have peas in our crop rotation, but in the last decade, with all the research that's come out and the nitrogen fixation of that crop, you can reduce fertilizer use that way. It's really beneficial to growing all your other crops. So peas have definitely made it into our crop rotation.
You said that scary nitrogen word. I think that's probably a proper segue into what I think will make the beef of this conversation. We just released an episode with a guy named Tim Crowder talking about the 30% reduction in fertilizer that I guess our federal administration is trying to impose on Canadian farmers. So I reached out to you because I wanted a quite literally boots on the ground perspective from a farmer who would be most directly impacted by this sort of policy and best understand the fallout that might come from a policy like this. So why don't we start it this way? Do you understand why the federal government might want to make a 30% reduction in how much fertilizer Canada uses?
It's a little bit loaded because you would have to fully believe that why they were doing that was beneficial. So no, I don't really understand at all why they would want to do that.
Okay, so you don't believe that it's beneficial?
I can't see that it's beneficial. It's going to do more harm than it would ever do good.
Okay. So have you thought through their thinking? Is it something that you've tried to grapple with and understand? Or are you like me and kind of have a proclivity to donning your tin hat and wonder why a policy like that would be implemented when it seems to me it would so clearly hurt the production of food in our country?
Yeah, I would tend more towards your line of thinking. When I first heard about it, I started thinking about, okay, well, why do we use nitrogen in farming? Like it's literally plant food. So you're going to grow better crops when you have plant food. But some of the other benefits, it actually increases the carbon dioxide assimilation rate of plants. So just before this big nitrogen thing, it's all been about carbon and how we need to reduce our carbon emissions. But if you make us reduce our nitrogen emissions, or nitrogen use, it's actually going to make our carbon dioxide go up because the plants are going to be able to assimilate it at a faster rate.
Right. So just to clarify, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying here. If you paid attention in grade school, you one of the things that you learn is that the way we breathe oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, right? So is what you're saying a nitrogen-rich plant will consume more carbon and in turn produce more oxygen?
Yeah, it will assimilate that carbon at a faster rate. So yeah, it will take it in faster, it will process it faster, and then produce oxygen faster.
Right.
Because
so
that feeds it.
Sorry, I missed that. What was that last part?
Because it has that nitrogen that feeds it.
Right. So in the green conversation, which is a very, very loud conversation in our country right now, your argument would be that it is greener to use nitrogen in the soil because you can get rid of a greater amount of carbon with the plants that are already there.
Well, to a point, it's greener to use the right amount of nitrogen. And really all farmers practice the 4 R's of stewardship, it's called, of good land stewardship. So we apply the right fertilizer at the right rate, like the right amount. at the right place, like close to the plant, how far away from the plant, and at the right time. And we've been doing this like forever. Farmers have always been trying to like tweak this and get it better and better. So we never want to overuse nitrogen, not just because we don't want to be wasteful, but also like we're running a business. We don't want to apply more than what is needed for the plant to produce its optimal amount.
That's a great point. Does it drive you nuts that some guy in Ottawa in a suit in a boardroom is deciding how much nitrogen you should use on your farm when you're the one on your farm tweaking exactly how much is right to use as little as possible because you don't want to spend the money on it while getting the greatest impact out of it? Does that bug you? Because I'm not even a farmer and it bugs me.
Actually, I just find it very insulting. I find it insulting that it detracts from all the good that farmers have tried to do, that we've tried to be the best stewards of the land that we possibly can. Like I even watched my dad trying to keep up with the technology that we have to use now with, sectional control and computer monitors that are like iPads on the tractors. And there's multiple ones of them and you have to adjust things and touch them all the time. And it's not easy for everybody. Everyone's constantly trying to make improvements and do the best that they can. And we are, again, really attached to this land. So when they create policies like this without an open conversation and dialogue with us, it's just very, very insulting.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I know this is a bit of a rabbit hole on one side of the conversation, but what do you mean about iPads and tractors? My recollection of tractors is my grandfather's farm, climbing up his big old green John Deere and him driving it into gear and plowing fields for hours. And I would sit beside him and watch all the birds come in behind because, of course, the soil's now exposed and all of the grubs and worms are coming out of it and all the seagulls land and they eat up all the grubs. And what do you mean there's iPads and tractors?
We still have lots of those tractors on the farm and they still have their purpose for sure. And I think that, my dad has some sentimental attachment to quite a few of them and they last forever. But with all the technology that's required now to seed your crop and harvest it, you have to have there's lots of people, not everybody, but lots of people are moving towards sectional control and variable rate. So you'll work with your agronomists, they'll soil test all the different parts of your land, see what the nutrient profile is and where it's lacking. And then they can input that into the computer on your equipment so that when you come across that section of land, if you were seeding or fertilizing, it will apply the amount that is needed in those specific spots.
That's crazy. Based on, hold on. So does it read it as you're going across or do you go across before fertilizing, build a geographical map of the nutrients in the soil and then input that into the computer, and then as you're driving across with the fertilizer, it tunes the fertilizer use to the soil?
Yeah, exactly that.
That's insane.
Technology in them is pretty mind-blowing, and they do try to make it pretty user-friendly. So the younger generations, I say it's like an iPad. It's not actually an iPad. It's not an Apple product or anything, but it's a little bit more intuitive. But if you have grown up and had your whole farming career with the more mechanical style tractors like you referred to before, where you just open cabs and just put it into gear and you go, this has been a gigantic step for many of our agriculture community to keep up with. Even the manuals that come with it are these thick tomes of information of how to navigate all the computer screens.
Yeah, no kidding.
On my social media, people can see, I think.
Yeah. That's so interesting. One, I'm blown away and deeply impressed by the amount of care that goes into something like that. So that brings me to the next question. Why do you think it is that Ottawa is informing policy on farmers when there's already things in place for the purpose of tuning fertilizer to the soil and making sure that you can achieve the greatest yield with the least amount of output? It sounds like it's something that's already been thought about, and you would think that would make sense because farmers quite literally make their living off the land. Why the change?
Honestly, I don't understand. I don't know why they would make the change. Maybe because everything they've done in the past has not been working. We haven't decreased our emissions of anything. The climate is changing the way that it's changing, and maybe we're not having enough impact, so they've got to try something new. I'm not exactly sure why they're doing it, but I'm just blown away that in a time where we have a food and fuel shortage globally, they're actively asking us to decrease our fertilizer, which right now it is not mandatory, it's voluntary. I don't know who would volunteer for it, but decrease our fertilizer use, which will greatly decrease our yields. But at the same time, they're also asking us to increase our food production and also to increase the ethanol component of our fuels. So like, it doesn't even make sense to me. How are we supposed to do all of this?
Yeah, it's pulling you in two very different directions at one time. So they want to decrease your fertilizer, which is the amount of food you feed your plants, while at the same time having you increase your output of food. That makes sense, right?
I just don't understand their thought process. And probably one of the most insulting parts of it is that there hasn't been the open dialogue. We can't, like, come sit down with us, come out to the farm, come ride in a combine, come see what farmers are doing, the technology that we're using, what we're trying to implement, and how you'll see quickly how closely attached we are to this land. We're not trying to be wasteful. We're good stewards of this land. If they would sit down and have that dialogue with us, I think maybe you could arrive at some kind of solution for whatever you think the problem is.
Well, yeah, that land is obviously your greatest asset. That land is generational, and that land is a part of your family in more ways than one. And that land is what you drive income off of. So why wouldn't you be a good steward of that land and think about what that land might need to continue to prosper, right?
And that land is also finite, right? Like, there's no more land being produced. The earth has only a certain amount of arable, seedable land to grow food for an increasingly growing population. So my worry is that creating mandates like this from a country that is very good at what they do with food production, very safe, reliable, has the best practices, we're not going to be able to manage that food supply. We're not going to be able to provide enough.
Right. So here's a question. As a farmer, understanding the landscape of the policy, and you brought up the energy problem as well, with what we're seeing out of Ukraine and Russia. Russia being a large exporter of energy and Ukraine being a large exporter of grain. Looking at the landscape of what is going on the planet right now, are you concerned about food supply? And if so, how shortly do you see the problem coming home to roost in Canada?
I'm definitely concerned about food supply because I think I read a statistic that 40 to 60% of our current global food supply can be attributed to fertilizer use. So if you decrease that fertilizer use, and we start to do that in some of the major producing countries, then yes, we are going to have shortages. How soon we'll see that in Canada, I'm not sure, because we are a developed nation that has access to more funds. I'm not sure how exactly it will go, but if they continue on this path, there will be food shortages, and the food that is available will be more expensive. And everything is already more expensive. I don't know if, like, the average family can handle things getting much more expensive.
Yeah, the squeeze is already so very real, and to the prospect of that continuing to spiral out of control isn't a very bright prospect, is it? What about climate? As a steward of the land, which I love the idea of that. I love that term. As a steward of the land, as someone who is constantly thinking about the land and how you can pass that land continuously through generations, how do you view the climate debate? Where do you see that?
Again, I don't feel that it's a debate. It's a one-sided narrative. I wish that the leading scientists from all sides were allowed to sit down together and actually discuss their perspectives, because it seems like right now that if you go looking into science, you can find science that will support any side of any issue. But what we need to see is them actively engaged, debating it back and forth and sharing their data and their research that they've done. Even as, like, my science background, a few strange things from it, but going through university, I think that I was told a certain way of thinking. So even on the farm, for instance, when I took environmental science in school, their solution was, don't spray your fields, don't use pesticides, just use chickens or release ladybugs into the fields. I was like, well, that might be fine if you have like a small backyard hobby farm kind of thing. But for thousands of acres, I'm not sure how you're expecting chickens to go do the weeding, and how many chickens you're going to need, and how many people you're going to need to round up those chickens. Strange things like that. And then also, learning about historically what the globe has been like in the past with carbon. And I remember one of my profs talking about during, I think it was the Cretaceous period, when the carbon dioxide atmosphere levels were 6 times what they currently are. So off the charts, like everyone would be freaking out if that happened. But that was the time of global greening, the most global greening our planet has ever seen. And also the time of the highest level of new species proliferation that we've ever seen on the planet. So there was a lot of goodness that came out of that. So maybe some of those scientists that promote that should sit down with the ones that have the climate doom and gloom narrative, and let's discuss it openly and have that civil discourse so we can actually hear all the sides of the information.
When was that era of history? When the carbon was 6x what it is now? How long ago was that?
Well, I believe it was the Cretaceous period. So that's, I don't know, I wish my son was here because he knows all the dinosaur periods and all the things. I don't remember that anymore now.
So a long time ago.
Yeah.
A long time ago. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that you say it's not a debate, because I think as a wider conversation, there's a lot of that in our country right now. There's a lot of, this is the approved idea. You see that in climate. You see that we certainly saw that in government policy and healthcare over the course of the pandemic. Civil discourse seems to be under attack. It's a shame to me that we can't just get leading experts together in a room and have a very simple conversation that says, here's your side, here's my side. Let's butt heads respectfully and figure it out, because we all actually, no, it doesn't matter what side of the conversation you're on. We're all actually aimed at the same thing. If you want to talk about the climate problem, we're all, I don't know a single person that I've ever run into who's like, yeah, I really want the planet to suffer. I would just love it if it got worse. And I love smog, and I love not being able to breathe. And I think that's the future for our country. Like, no one thinks that way. That person, I don't think, exists. Why do you think it is that civil discourse is so under attack in our country? Why can't we just get leading experts together to have honest debate and have the conversation within our country?
I love the word civil discourse, first of all. I use that one a lot, actually. I don't know why. It feels like maybe it's because the government can get more control or some more power when there's greater divide, because I don't think we've ever been a country that hasn't had civil discourse. I feel like I've always been able to talk, but at the higher levels, with the higher level scientists in government, it seems like it's gone out the window and we're not allowed to openly engage in conversation. And we're needing that right now. I don't think that we're actually on different sides. I think that we're all actually on a similar side. We do want the best for our planet. We want the best for our land. The route of how we get there is where we're unsure of how to navigate. And that's where we need the people to come together and give us the best information possible.
Yeah, it's actually really productive when you realize that everyone's trying to get to the same place to have the discourse, right? Because if you're humble enough, maybe I'm wrong about something. And if I am, I want you to tell me that as soon as possible so that I can correct course, so that we can get to where we're trying to go as fast as possible. But between pride and outright censorship, that happens less and less. Do you ever talk to some of the older generations in your family about the difference between the political climate, say, 60 years ago, 80 years ago, and now? Have you ever had any of those conversations? I find it very interesting to talk to people who are a lot older than me and have them compare then and now. Do you have those conversations within your family?
We've had some of those conversations. We don't talk a ton of politics sometimes because there's varying viewpoints on things, but from some of like my grandma or my dad and stuff talking about politics, there's always been this kind of wave of we go extreme to like a conservative nature, and then maybe so much that people get tired of not having their needs taken care of by the government. So then that portion of the population will kind of swing it back towards a little bit more of a pull towards socialism. And it seems like a pendulum that swings. But I do think that over the history of it, especially out in agriculture in the rural areas, there's always been a very leaning to conservative principles. It's the way that we operate our farms and our businesses and how we take care of the land. We try to be conservative. So it's not just a fiscal policy. It's kind of a way that we operate our lives policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how the pendulum swings. I think I've observed that too, and it certainly seems to be swinging towards socialism right now, which terrifies me. Do you think, like, do you have a doom and gloom view of that within our country? Like, are you on the page of, man, we're in real trouble, like this could really go south, or do you have faith that the pendulum's just gonna, like, that ball swinging is just gonna run out of momentum and we're gonna come back the other way?
Well, I actually think that a little pendulum swing is probably good because I think it keeps both sides in check because they know that, if they go too far, a little too crazy on something, it's going to start going back the other way and they're going to start losing some of their power. And it seems we have a very power hungry government and a very bloated government, I might add too. There's just like way too much government, but I'm more of a libertarian at heart completely anyways. Oh, now I got kind of sidetracked. Now I'm off topic.
No, that's okay. Do you think the pendulum is going to swing back? Do you have faith in that?
I do right now. Actually, I think the last couple of years have been really hard. And obviously we could talk about mental health and everything that's been happening the last couple of years and politics. It's been super difficult. But for the first time in those couple of years, I actually feel very, very hopeful. I see like this movement going across Canada, across Alberta, even locally, of wanting some common sense principles and bringing common sense back to government and maybe even decreasing the size of government. So I have a lot of faith in the changes that can be made in our federal government. Definitely a lot of faith in our provincial government. We have some great leaders vying for the top spot of the UCP leadership. Mm-hmm. And I doubt that they'll be able to take Alberta on a better path. Absolutely. And that's kind of the short-term goal, I think, is get Alberta into more of an autonomous position where we can control our destiny a bit better. And then when it comes time to vote on the federal election, hopefully we can make some giant changes there because, oh my gosh, enough Trudeau already.
Oh, I'm counting down the days to the next federal election. I wake up every day happy that it's a day closer to get that loser out of office. So you talked about the UCP leadership. That's something that we've discussed a lot on the podcast. Do you have a candidate or a couple candidates that you see to be a good fit for Alberta? I'm always interested to hear what Albertans think about this race.
Well, I've looked at the platforms of like all the candidates, and it is funny, like they're all very, very similar. So they're all running on very solid platforms. So I think that when it comes down to choosing the best fit for you to vote for, it has to be the person that you feel is most dynamic and most likely to fulfill everything on their platform. So in my mind, like I have great respect for Todd Loewen over the last couple of years when they were making mandates and his constituents were talking to him saying, this isn't right. We don't want this. He actually acted on his constituents' wishes, which is what an elected representative is supposed to do. Even though it was at great detriment to his political career, he was kicked out of caucus and has to sit as an independent, but he still made those moves because his constituents requested it. So I have great respect for him. He has a very patriotic heart and a very freedom-loving heart. Also, Danielle Smith, she's a very similar story too. She wasn't in politics at the time. I spent quite a few years very angry at her, processing those emotions, but also still listening to her when she was on QR77 and her different platforms. And I think I got to understand her head and her heart a lot better from staying with her, even through that anger, and processed it and realized her heart is in the right place. And she's learned. I don't think that we're a province that penalizes you for perpetuity because you've made a mistake. So I hope people have begun to forgive her and can move on past that. But yeah, she has a very strong freedom mandate, and she was very involved in the last 2 years at fighting against some of the government overreach. So I highly respect her as well. So those two really stand out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point to bring up in an age of censorship and cancel, like people getting canceled. I think as a society, we've forgotten this idea of people make mistakes. Right. Fancy that. There's not a single person out there who hasn't. I make plenty of them. I make them all the time. And we have lost recently our ability to allow people to make mistakes, but also allow them to correct those mistakes. This idea that we are digging up dirt from 10 years ago and saying, you did this thing and it was wrong and it was bad, and now you don't have a place at the table. Man, do you know how much I've changed in the last 10 years? Like, I'm sure you feel the same way. In a decade, a person can grow so much. And just because they made a decision at one point in their life doesn't mean that that's even a thing that they believe in anymore. And I'm happy to hear that you stuck with Danielle through that process, even when you felt like you didn't agree with her and you were angry, because that's a great example of how everyone can change, and I love that. But something else that you mentioned earlier that I don't want to miss, you mentioned mental health, which is something that conversation is super important to me. And I love hearing people's stories of what their pandemic experience was like, because my experience here in Southern Ontario would be quite different than your experience out in Alberta on a 9,000-acre farm. So what was the pandemic like for you and your family? How did it affect you guys?
Like everybody, I would guess you would say that it was very difficult and very hard. There was Christmases that we had to miss or do outside, birthday parties we had to celebrate outside. Out in the country, like, we are more removed from that constant group of people. So it wasn't always as in our face as it was for people, I think, that live in town or in the city. Because every time we go to town, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, all the masks and the one way down the grocery aisles and all the rules all of a sudden. Whereas, lots of our days are outside. It wasn't as many rules around that. But yeah, it helped. It didn't help. It suffered, made our mental health suffer a lot just from having to end those family ties for a little while. And also, I think that I was talking weird just because I get emotional thinking about at the time when COVID first hit. I was teaching in a junior high classroom in one of our rural schools, which I'm deeply connected to too, and just love that little school. And all of a sudden, these kids that I loved seeing every day, and we would spend, all day learning about science and exploring all different topics and laughing together and, tons of hugs and celebrations. We went to seeing each other through a screen like this and being completely removed from that social contact. And then hearing the stories from some of the kids of how much their mental health suffered and how serious some of their mental health issues became was really, really heartbreaking. And not being able to go and help take care of that. I think we're going to see the repercussions of this for a very, very long time. And I think it actually changed the makeup of these kids. I hope it changes them for the better in the long term. And they realize that, they need to stand up in the future when they're adults for themselves, and that they develop freedom-loving hearts and patriotic hearts and realize the importance of community and social connection and stand up for all those principles and values. But I think in the near future here that we're going to see a lot of consequences from it.
Yeah. I'm not a father yet. I plan to be a father one day, but because I think about that, and I think about the children, who are here, I think about my nieces. I struggle to not become angry when I think about how deeply those children were affected. Like, obviously, I struggled through the pandemic too. There were hard moments. It was scary. It was traumatic. Uncertainty was everywhere you looked, and that was hard. But that was me as an almost 30-year-old man, and I have more emotional capacity to deal with those sorts of things than a child. When I think about, especially when you compare how little COVID actually affects children, and that data was widely available early on in the pandemic, the fact that we couldn't rally our policy as a country to reflect how low the risk was to those children when things like mental health was in an obvious decline because they don't have the emotional capacity to handle those sorts of things the same way adults do, that really angers me. And as a teacher, you would have seen that in a first-person perspective. Obviously, don't share names, keep everything anonymous, but what kinds of things did you observe in your students? What were the struggles?
Well, you would see that kids would stop tuning in to the Zoom calls and the Zoom teaching, that you don't even know what they were doing, really. Like, you lost just the total connection of them. But then you also heard of other kids that were like very seriously affected by it, that were to the point of, Great Depression and suicidal tendencies and really sad, heartbreaking things that I just feel like if we had been in person, that you could have done something to prevent that, or you could have given the timely hug or the support that was needed at the time. But yeah, there were some really devastating things. And again, it comes back to, we weren't allowed to practice civil discourse. We weren't allowed to have a conversation about how much we could see our kids were hurting and the students were hurting, because that side wasn't allowed to speak. We had to stay quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's a question. A lot of the teachers in Ontario felt it was unsafe for the teachers to be in the classroom, right? Because we were kind of figuring out that the children were safe, that COVID wasn't deeply affecting the children. As an educator, would you have chosen to step into the classroom to help those kids? Is that a choice you would have made, or was there a time and place where you wanted to hold back too?
So the first couple of weeks when it was first hitting and we were first getting information, or didn't even have tons of information, but just first learning about it, I think, yeah, I was doing all the things that we were supposed to do. If I went to get groceries from Costco, I was the person outside in the parking lot, wiping them down with Lysol before I put them in my vehicle to bring them home. I was being super cautious, didn't want to get any of our, older family members ill, taking all the precautions. But as it went on, and I could see the harm that was happening, and I don't know how to say, I definitely would have gone back to the classroom. 100%. I would have been in there with my kids, and I would be okay with that being a choice for all of the staff to have gone back. And if you didn't feel comfortable with that, that's fine. That's the whole point of this last 2 years for me, was fighting for the freedom of choice and the freedom to live your life in the best way for you and your family. So I would have chosen to go back there. Others might not have, but
yeah, that's so important, isn't it? And that's something that we hit on the podcast all the time. You have to be able to choose, and that came under assault over the course of the pandemic. We stopped being able to choose, and I think I hope that that's something that we can take out of this entire situation. I think about this all the time. Humans are so quick to forget, and I worry that already we are forgetting some of the lessons that the pandemic taught us. And there was a time in my life, not so long ago even, where I was incredibly critical of a lot of pandemic response and policymakers, and, very angry. And in some regards, I still am. But I realize now that, there's plenty of blame that we can pass around, right? But that isn't necessarily productive at this point. What I want us to all remember is there was a time when you couldn't go see your family for Christmas. There was a time that you had to limit the amount of people that went into a grocery store. There was a time when your child couldn't go to school. There was a time when you weren't allowed to see your friends. And even though the prospect of the pandemic was scary and we didn't know a lot of things at the front end, in hindsight, I don't look at any of those policies as appropriate. And I understand that is my way of seeing it. But what I want to stress out of that is, one, we cannot forget that happened. And two, we have to defend. We absolutely have to defend our ability to make our own decisions. And if we as a country can't catch that, I'm concerned about the future of our country. And I think that's probably a sentiment that you would maybe share.
I think that you share a libertarian heart as well, is what I'm guessing from that, hey?
Yeah, I would describe myself that way, yeah.
Yeah, well, I've seen even on the social media this morning that Dina Hinshaw is being called back into court, possibly because there were things that she knew about the harm that masking could do to children that she didn't share in her recent court cross-examinations. It's like there's always more information coming out, but again, it all would have been solved at the time if we were just allowed to have that civil discourse and talk. And if I'm allowed to ask a question and say, are you sure that masks are good for the kids and they're not doing more harm than good? And then the response can be, yeah, don't be stupid, Tanya. Here's all the research and here's why. And then if I could again ask a question like, are you sure this research was done properly and blah, blah, blah. If you could just talk back and forth about it, we probably could have solved a lot of this heartache for our.
Yeah. So civil discourse, we need that. The ability to make decisions for ourselves, we need that. What else does Canada need going forward?
New leadership. Leadership.
Yeah.
We do. We need new leadership. We need a return of patriotism. Maybe we do have a lot of patriotism, but I think it's the government and the mainstream media is always trying to create a great divide. And I feel this in the country a lot. It always seems like the narrative is that the urban and rural, they're at each other, they're divided, they're not on the same page. But at the same time, when I go into the city or I meet with my city friends or city family, I don't feel that divide at all. It feels like something that is just being told at us to try to break us apart. So I don't know if it's we need more patriotism or we already have patriotism and we just need to ignore that vile message that's being sent to us all the time.
I think we have, I mean, we can always use more patriotism, but I think we have lots of patriotism and we just need less news.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I don't watch a ton of the news. My news is pretty not mainstream, but
yeah. Well, I'm in the same boat. And I've said this before on the podcast, but if you're still watching CBC and CTV and all of those legacy media platforms, like just stop. Your life will be better if you just stop.
Well, and I love like the mission of your podcast too. I'm not sure if I'll mess up the way that you guys phrase it, but how good Canada could be, is, and should be, or where we are at now and where we could be. You know, like
what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be, and that was the original inception of the podcast. We just wanted to talk to Canadians like you and learn about how cool Canada and Canadians are, because I mean we're still a baby nation in many ways, and part of the reason David and I started this podcast, David being my co-host who is unfortunately sick today. Sorry guys. Part of the reason we started the podcast is because we love Canada and we love Canadians, and we didn't feel like that was being well enough represented. You know, Canada's reputation I do lots of traveling, right? I travel with a band. Before the pandemic, I was traveling to Europe once or twice a year and, all over America and a bunch of other places. And the international reputation of our country is kind of like, oh yeah, those are the guys that like have beavers and are super nice. And I just thought we could do better than that. We have so many beautiful, incredible, different types of people in our country, but they are all Canadians and they all matter and they all deserve to have their story told. And so what Canada is, what Canada could be, what Canada should be, that was kind of the creed of the podcast. Like, let's just have the conversations and through those conversations, draw out the heart of the nation. And I hope we're doing a good job because that's what we're going for.
Great job. Yeah. And I wish that our leadership would take some cues from like your podcast basically and do that. Let's start celebrating things that we are doing well. Instead of telling farmers that they have to make changes and reduce their fertilizer and stop growing food so well, why don't you just say, hey, thanks for practicing these 4 R's for your entire life and getting better and better at them all the time and always seeking out how to provide more for the world with the limited amount of land you have.
The top-down enforcement is such a proud, like, we can do your job better than you mentality. Like, why? It's frustrating that they think they know the lay of the land better than the farmer on the land.
Right. And like our Minister of Ag, Marie-Claude Bebeau, if that's how you say her name, I don't even know how to pronounce it properly, but I don't believe that she's actually got a farm background. I hope that she surrounds herself with a bunch of people that are ag experts that have farm, that have been on the land. But like, have any of those leaders that are making policy decisions, have they come out to a farm and spent some time out there? Have they rode in a combine? Like, I don't know any of our neighbors out here that have, politicians coming out riding with them, other than like our local MP. He's pretty awesome. But
yeah, nice. Here's a question. On the 30% reduction, you mentioned it was voluntary, right? I didn't realize that. If it is voluntary, is there any speak of how, like, if it's voluntary, what does enforcement look like? Do you have any indication of how they're going to try to measure what's happening, or like, what is the plan?
I think they changed the wording so that it, with the backlash, so it's not mandatory yet, but you know how government works. Like if they've announced it, it's coming our way, unless, the Dutch farmers do a good enough job that it scares our government too. But yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know how they would police that. Like I've talked to that with our family too. What if, like, is it going to be per acre that you have to prove something with your nitrogen reduction? Or like, what if you seed more peas that year? What if we put the whole farm to peas? Is that like a 100% nitrogen reduction then? We don't have to fertilize anything? Or like, I don't know how you would ever police this and enforce it.
To me, it sounds like what this administration is known for.
Yeah.
And it's just, here's a policy and this is a news headline and we are green. And
because we love our climate, even though it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it makes no sense. Are you aware of what's happening in Saskatchewan right now with the federal agents trespassing on farmers' lands? Have you seen any of those stories?
Yeah, I read a little bit about it. Cian Bexty on Countersingle has quite a few posts about that on Twitter and stuff. But yeah, that sounds crazy. And I know that our like UCP leadership candidates, they've all stood up against that and said that's not welcome here. But then I've also heard a couple of reports that possibly was happening in Alberta. So I'm not sure if it has been, but
it's something to watch for sure. It sounds like, and I could be incorrect in saying this, but it sounds like, and I forget his name, I was just looking at him this morning, but the premier of Saskatchewan is looking at legal pushback to the federal government, essentially saying this is a provincial jurisdiction. You don't have the right to be on this land. You are trespassing. We are going to press criminal charges. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, that would be kind of exciting.
Yeah,
but also what's really weird is that this is all breaking and mainstream media, crickets, like
not a peep.
Not about it anywhere.
Not a peep. Yeah, but we're used to that here. We're used to that here on the Canadian Story. The mainstream media is a waste of time. It's stupid. Stop watching it. I'll say it again. Stop. Okay, one last little piece before we kind of round this up and take it home. You mentioned the Dutch farmers. What's your take on what's going on over there?
Well, I've only seen it from like Rebel News and the couple places that actually report on it there, but they were having a mandated reduction of fertilizer by something like up to 85%. It's like it was going to absolutely cripple their agriculture economy. Like the families were going to lose their farms. It was done. So the farmers have rallied and shut down basically the entire country, but they also have the support of the entire country because I think maybe they've been able to get more information shared back and forth, that even the people in the cities and towns, they're supportive of the farmers because they can see the negative direction that this was heading. So it's just been like in a giant lockdown until that policy's removed.
Mm-hmm. I'm a stick it to the man sort of guy. I grew up on punk rock music. I like the idea of challenging authority, and I just get an immense amount of satisfaction out of the idea of a farmer spraying manure on a politician's front door. I think that's just beautiful. I love that.
You're a little wilder. I'm still like a little bit of a rule follower and would do it like in a respectful way, but you do get pushed to a point where you're like, okay, you know what? You need a load of manure on you. That is.
Is there a respectful way of spreading manure on someone's front porch? I don't think that there is.
But I do think like protesting is still in a respectful way. Like I do think the Freedom Convoy, for example, things like that, you can still do without, if you get to the manure point, whatever, like you go ahead and do that and I will laugh and chuckle and applaud you. I just don't know if I personally can do that, but definitely a convoy, a shutdown, demanding the government to listen. Yeah, I'm all for that.
I'll tell you what, I was about at the end of my rope and had almost lost hope until that convoy came along. That convoy changed everything for people.
I feel exactly the same. It was all of a sudden you're like, I am not alone. There are millions of people in this country who feel the same way, who love this country like I do, who love freedom like I do, and they're willing to stand up for it. It was the greatest part of Canadian history to be a part of, I think, in our lifetimes.
I'm so thankful I got to be here for it. I'm so thankful because I think that will go down in history books as a time that our country changed. And I got to see it firsthand. I cannot begin to describe the feeling. I didn't go to Ottawa. I wish I had. I should have. But what I did is I went to one of the overpasses on a highway that I knew the convoy was coming down in a city called Hamilton in Ontario. And bearing in mind, at the time, I believe, so at the time, there were still mask mandates. There were still vaccination passports. It was still a lockdown. You weren't really supposed to be going anywhere that you didn't have to. And I am telling you, no word of a lie. So my background is in music, right? So I tour with a band. I see large crowds on a semi-regular basis. And because I've been doing that for a decade, I have a bit of a hand at judging how many people are at something because I see it all the time. Just at one single overpass, the overpass that I went to, there would have been, I would say, between 7,000 and 10,000 people in the area. Just at one single overpass during lockdown, during a mask mandate. None of these people were in masks. And you know what? These people, for the first time in 2 damn years, were happy. And people were hugging strangers and passing out, you know, the Tim Hortons like to-go things where you get like the box of coffee. People were walking around with those, pouring like strangers' coffee. I have never been to a better party in my life. And it was in the dead of winter. It was like minus 23 degrees Celsius. And people, for the first time in 2 years, were so happy. And that was the day, that was the moment in my life when I realized that there was still hope left for Canada. And look at how much we have changed since then. Look at how much has changed. I am so unbelievably thankful for the people who got into their trucks, who drove to Ottawa, who sat in the streets and said, no more. Those people are heroes.
I love that. I love everything you just said. I think seeing like all of those Canadian flags too, like just that's where you saw the patriotism. Like there is a deep love for our country and there's a deep commitment to making it better. And we've seen that everybody keeps coming together for that same purpose.
Absolutely. Tanya, we got to wrap up here, but I want to give you a moment to kind of close this out for us and just communicate from a farmer's perspective. As a farmer, what do you need Canada to know about what is happening to farmers right now? And we talk about getting information out there. What is the information Canada needs to know?
I think that we need to know that our government needs to start doing a better job of what they're mandated to do, which is run our economy. They have not been doing a great job of that, obviously. So if they would just get their affairs in order and allow us to run our businesses, because that's what farming is. It is our business too and our livelihood without their interference. That it's not a mandate yet of the fertilizer reduction. It's a voluntary suggestion, I guess maybe is how you would put it, to reduce your fertilizer inputs, which I can't imagine us ever voluntarily complying with, because our purpose is to grow as much as we can, as well as we can, limiting the amount of nutrients and inputs that we have to input into it so that our crops are growing in the best way possible, but also managing our business. We don't want to put in excess. We're not just throwing out random fertilizer and giving it away for free. It's expensive. We just came off of putting in the most expensive crop right after a drought. Like we're to the brink almost. Lots of farmers are feeling the pinch. So we need the government to actually realize what we are doing out here on the farms and that we're trying to grow a better product with less.
Amazing. Tanya, thank you for being here. Thank you for putting food on our table. You guys are heroes. You guys are amazing. Much love and respect for the farming community in our country. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. And I super appreciate podcasts like yours where you allow the civil discourse and just talking to the people of our country that love our country and getting to hear the stories and engaging with our community.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great our country is.